In this tutorial, we are going to take a reference image and lay out pieces of clip art that come free with your software to create a golf award. We're going to show you how to manipulate the pieces of clip art to give you a really nice layout using different techniques, and ultimately we'll take that layout and we'll put it into a dish. To get started, we're going to open up a new session of the software. We're going to create a new file. And this will be a single-sided job. The width is going to be 8 inches. The height will be 8 inches. The thickness will be a 1/2 inch. We're going to zero off our material surface. We're going to make sure that our datum is set to the center of our job. And we are going to use a high modeling resolution for this particular layout. And we're going to click OK. There's a bunch of different ways to start a project. You can just start dragging in clip art if you'd like, but for this particular job, we're going to start with a bitmap. So we're going to use the import bitmap command. And you'll see that inside of your tutorials folder, there's a bitmap called Golf Award Sketches. Now I drew this on a piece of paper. I took a photo of it using my cell phone and saved it off somewhere where I could find it. And this is what the result is. So if we select that and we click open, you'll see that we have a bitmap. Now, one thing I want to point out before we do anything with the bitmap is that up under your layers menu, you'll see that there's a new layer called bitmap, and that was created when we imported that bitmap in. And right now, if you turn it on and off, all that's on that layer is that bitmap. So we're just going to click somewhere so that that drop down goes away and go back and select our bitmap. Now, it's pretty obvious that this is rotated the wrong way, so we're going to need to fix that. So if we select our bitmap, you'll see that we'll end up having these 4 rotation handles show up. If we hold down our Alt key while we use that, you'll see that it locks it in different positions. But that's not going to help us any, because really what we want to do is more of a free form rotation. So we're going to let go of the Alt key, and we're going to just rotate that until the center layout is roughly straight across, and that looks pretty good. It doesn't need to be perfect. We're just going to use this as reference for our layout. Now, holding down the Shift key, we're going to go ahead and use this little black circle with the white center on the corners, and that will allow us to scale up our image. And because we have the Shift key held down, it's scaling from the center of our bitmap. And then we can go ahead and just somewhere roughly like that, just so you can see it pretty good. Now, there's lots of visual noise here, so really all we want to see is just the center layout. And the best way to do that is to crop our bitmap. So in order to use the cropping bitmap feature in the software, we need to have 2 things. We need to have a closed vector and a bitmap. So we have the bitmap already. We just need to create a closed vector. So we're going to use the draw a rectangle. Again, it can be any closed shape. It's just a rectangle is easy in this case. And we're going to draw it in just roughly in there, so it encompasses our center design. And we're going to click apply. We're going to close that down. And we may as well just tweak that just slightly by using these sizing handles and just get it so that we're going to get rid of most of the other drawing stuff. Okay. Now, with this rectangle selected, which it is, you can see that it's purple and it's dotted. If I hold down my Shift key, I can also select the bitmap in the background. And now I've got the 2 things that I need to use this cropping bitmap feature. So let's go ahead and click that. And you'll see what happens is the software has gotten rid of anything outside of the rectangle and left me only with what's in the middle. Now let's just go ahead and delete out that rectangle. We don't need it anymore. And again, selecting that bitmap, oh, you're going to notice something right away as soon as you click that the bounding box for it is not square or not straight, doesn't have straight sides, it's rotated slightly. That's because it's remembering the rotation that we did originally. Now we don't want it to be that way. So if we go ahead and right click on that selected bitmap, we can bake the rotated bounds. And that'll make it so that our bounding box now hugs the corners and the sides of our bitmap quite tightly. And we're going to select that again, and we're going to hold down our Shift key, and we're going to scale it up to roughly around there. We're not going to be too particular, but that seems pretty good. And then let's just go ahead and drag it to the center. And I'm pretty happy with that. So now we can go ahead and start to create our layout. Okay, there's several different ways to bring in 3D content into your job. I'm going to demonstrate 3 of those right now, but there are more, but these are the 3 that probably you're going to use most often. If you go to your modeling tab, you can go ahead and choose this icon right here, which is import a component or 3D model. If you click that, you can navigate on your PC to wherever you have your Clipart saved and import those components in. In this case is pointing directly to our tutorials file, and you'll see that we've included all 3 bits of Clipart that you need for this layout there. So let's just go ahead and double click on the single laurel, and we can now, because when it comes in, it's automatically selected and it's centered perfectly in your job space, you can go ahead and mess around with the sizing of this. So let's holding down our shift key, we're going to size it up a little bit, grabbing the center point and holding down our alt key, we can go ahead and drag that up a little bit. And I'm pretty happy right now with the alignment of that. That looks pretty nice. The next way to bring in 3D Clipart that I'm going to demonstrate is if you click on your Clipart tab, and if you've installed any of the free Clipart that you've received with your software, then it will show up in your library browser under your Clipart. In this case, we're going to look at the ribbons and banners, and you'll see that there's the ribbon number 4 that we saw a minute ago. But also we can look at the objects and people, and if we look down through that, you're going to see there's the golf ball and tee. Let's just go ahead and double click on that one, and it's going to again be brought directly into the center of your job space, and it's selected so you can go ahead and make any sort of rough changes you want to right now. In this case, I'm going to size it down a little bit, move it down a little bit, holding the alt key and the center handle. Let's size that down a little bit more. And I think I'm pretty happy with that right now. I'll bring it up a little bit further. But we're going to take time in a few minutes to make it even better. Now, the third way to do this is to use your local files up here. And if you click on that, you'll be presented with the directory structure of your computer, and also any external hard drives or any jump drives or USB keys you might have in your PC. And some people will store their Clipart in those locations, and if you do that, you can navigate there and you can find your Clipart. But in this case, I'm looking directly at our tutorials folder, and you'll see again there are the 3 pieces of Clipart, and if I double click on my ribbon, then it will bring it directly into my 3D view and center it as well. If I hold down my alt key and drag this down, you'll see that I can position that where I think it needs to be. It needs to go somewhere around there, I think. I'm pretty happy with that. So right now we're looking at the 2D view of our layout, and we really can't tell very well from this view how our components are interacting with each other. So if we go ahead and tile our 2D and our 3D views, so on our left hand side we have our 2D views, on the right hand side we have our 3D views, we can see that there's a few problems with our layout. Everything looks fairly good, but we need to make it even better. So the first thing I want to look at is that the bottom of our T is actually sticking out the bottom of our laurels. Now it's not so bad. We probably could get away with that and just call it a stem, but we want to make this perfect. So we're going to select our golf ball and tee, and if we hold down the alt key and then grab the center point of that component, we can drag it straight up and position it where we want it to be. Let's just hold down our shift key and size it down just a little bit, and I'm pretty happy with that, just the way it is there. The second thing we need to tackle is going to be our ribbon, which is definitely merging into our laurels, and it should actually be proud of our laurels. Now, this is where you can think about one major thing is that the object is to put this into a dish shape so we can machine it into something that we already have, a piece of stock wood that we might have kicking around, or in a words plaque, or even a cupboard door or something. And what I always look for is to make sure I get a good balance of all the high points should be all the same height if that's possible. So let's take a quick look and see how tall our laurel is. So if we select that, and when you do, you're going to see at the very bottom of this, there's this heavy dark blue square. If you click that, then up will pop your floating properties dialog, and we'll see that the shape height here is set to 0.3152. Well, let's just simply make that an easy number to remember. Let's make it 0.30. Press the spacebar for that to be accepted, and our 3D view will be updated. Let's have a look at our golf ball and tee. Again, it's a little bit taller than our laurels, but not too bad. Let's change that to 0.3, spacebar. And then we're just going to see if we scale up the shape height of our ribbon, if it's going to work or not. It may or may not work. We're not quite sure. So let's change that to 0.3 and we'll see what happens. Oh, and that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Now, there's one more little problem. Is the space here between the bottom or the tip of the curled up ribbon and the bottom of the leaf. There's not a whole lot of space there, and I would be worried that my cutting tool might not get through there and I'd have a little messy fillet there I need to deal with. So if we select that ribbon and we pull it down so that we're kind of happy with it, this is also going to mess up the shape height. If we look at our shape height now, because we've actually made it slightly bigger, it's slightly taller. So now we need to change this back to 0, and that should fix that problem for us. So I'm pretty happy with that now. Now a second ago, you'll see that I maximized my 3D view. I don't want to do that right now. I want to go back to the tile view. So I'm going to go ahead and tile that back to where it was by clicking on the tile button. And I'm pretty happy with all that. Now I don't need in my 2D view my bitmap anymore because I've used it already to help lay out my design. So let's go into our layers and we're going to hide our bitmap. And let's just click outside of that so that will go away, and we'll close down our floating properties dialog. I'd like to take a second now and point out that we were really lucky with our layout here, that everything worked out okay just by adjusting the shape heights. There are some other tools that you can use to make your components fit together better if you're having issues. And I'll just demonstrate one of those right now, which I think is quite powerful, and I use it quite often. If you select your laurel, and we go ahead and bring up the floating properties dialog box again, you're going to see fade and tilt. Now fade is quite a powerful operation when you're trying to get components to fit together nicely. So if we have our laurel selected, and if I click on the fade option, it gives me the option to set 2 anchor points. And we're going to fade between those 2 anchor points a percentage. So if we go ahead and drop those 2 anchor points, one here and one down here, then you'll see that by default the fade is set to 50%. So the detail up here doesn't get lost at all, but the detail down here does suffer a bit because we're kind of fading that in. Now in this case it doesn't help very much because we've got this large shelf here, but if we needed to, we could adjust this to be 25%, and you'll see that you get less fading at the bottom. We could change this to 10% and so on, and that will actually help those, could help those components look better together. But in this case we don't need that, so we're going to turn off the fade and we'll close this down, and we're going to look straight down at our layout again. Now for our next step, we want to actually put this inside of a dish, and that's fairly easy. So what we're going to do is go to our modeling tab, and you'll see that we're presented with our component tree at the bottom, and all of our components are listed in there. We've got our ribbon, we have our golf ball and tee, and we have our simple laurel wreath, and they're all in there. They're all being merged together, and that makes everything look just perfect. Now to put this inside the dish, the first step is going to be to add in a 0 plane. So if I click that, you'll see that in our 3D view we have a 0 plane, but in our 2D view we don't. It's not there, it's not represented there at all. That's because it has its own layer, and right now its layer is turned off. If we did turn it on, you'll see that it does fill up in our 2D view. But what could happen is it could actually block some of our components, and we wouldn't be able to see them in our 2D view. So we put it on its own dedicated layer, and it helps with that, and it's actually way less confusing. And also we need this 0 plane in here to help with some of the issues that we may run into when we create our tooling, and you'll see that in a little bit. Now let's go over to our Clipart tab and go to our library browser, and we are going to look for domes and dishes, and we're going to bring in this flat round circle. We'll double click on that, And again, it's going to come directly into our 3D view. And that looks okay. Now, it looks okay in the 2D view, not so much in the 3D view. So we need to go back to our modeling tab and change the combine mode of this dish. So if we right click on this dish, you can change the combine mode to subtract. Or what we can do is we can bring up our floating properties dialog box in the 3D view and change it to subtract here. And that works great. Let's close that down. Now, as you can see, our layout for our award doesn't quite fit inside of our dish. So we're going to have to do a couple things. The first thing we can try is to size up our dish so that it gets as big as we can. And that's probably good right about there. And let's just be sure, we want that to actually be a certain size. So if we press, with that selected, press T on the keyboard, we can go ahead and adjust our size. And we're going to change this to be 7.5. And with our X and Y linked, then it should change the size properly for us. We'll hit apply and then close, and that looks good, except for our reward doesn't fit inside of that. So for a second, we're going to go ahead and hide our flat round circle, and we're going to go ahead and shift select all three of these components, and we're going to create a group of these. Now, this is a temporary way of making these one thing so that we can go ahead and change it. And when we change the size, the shape, and so on, it will treat all of the components inside this group the same. So if we go down and choose group out of that, you'll see that we get a nice group here. It's labeled group. And if we use this little plus to the left, it'll actually, you'll see that it drops down a list of what we have, and that looks okay. And you'll also see that the bitmap representation in our 2D view now mirrors what we see in our 3D view, with our ribbon going over top of our laurel and the T merging in nicely with the laurel at the bottom. So that's kind of nice. Let's turn back on our flat round circle. Let's select that group, and we're just going to size it down and make sure that it fits, holding the shift key inside of that dish. I think that's okay. Now it's not quite centered, so we may as well go ahead and use our align tool to align our layout with the center of our dish. So if we select the group and then select the dish, and we go ahead and choose to align to the center of each other, then that's not too bad. It fixed it slightly. And what we're going to do now is grab just our group. Using our cursor keys, we're going to nudge it up just a little bit so that it ends up fitting in there better. I think that looks really good right there. Now, our next thing we need to think about is, because this is going to be cut below the surface of our material, we may as well utilize as much of our material thickness as we can. So let's have a look at how deep our dish is going to be. If we go to our modeling tab and we take a look at our component properties, you'll see that it's about 0.3386. So if we just change that to 0.3 of an inch, it's probably as far as we want to go in there. That looks good. And let's just go ahead and have a look at our actual layout here. Let's take a look at the components for that. And they're at 0.26. Now, one thing we're going to want to think about is we probably want whatever is inside of the dish to be slightly not proud of the surface of the dish, of our material, but fit nicely inside of our dish. So it needs to be less than, the shape height needs to be less than the depth of the dish. So let's change this to be 2.8. Press the space bar and take a look. If we look at our 3D view, if we twiddle around here, you'll see that it looks like it is actually underneath the surface of our material, but it's really hard to tell. So let's just go ahead and have a look at the scale Z height of model. So if we select everything here and we click that, you'll see that our current height at the top is 0.3, the minimum is minus 0.3, and the maximum is 0. So there isn't anything above the surface of our material or above our modeling plane here. So everything looks good, and we should be happy with that. Now the last thing we want to do is add a little bit of V-carving or some text here so that we can V-carve some information on our actual ribbon. So let's go to our drawing tab. And for this, what we want to do is we're going to maximize our 2D view for a second. Press F on the keyboard to focus it on our 2D view, and it will expand it to be as big as it can for our software. And we're going to drop in a couple lines here, one over here and one there. It's going to snap to the center. I'm going to press Escape on my keyboard. And seeing as this is still selected, if I hold down my Control, my Shift key, and my H key at the same time, it will make a copy of that vector across my job. Let's do that again, and I'll explain what happened there. So if you select that actual vector, so if you do this and you hold down the Shift and H, it just actually mirrors it across the center of your job. If I hold down the Control and press H, it will make a copy of it flipped on the center of the actual vector that I've got selected, which is not what I want, Control Z. But if I hold down the Shift, Control, and H, it'll make a copy across the center of my job. Now I could use the same with V. If I hold down my Control, my Shift, and my V, it will flip it vertically across the center of my job, and I end up getting a copy of my vector up here, which in this case isn't any use for me. I actually want to go Control, Shift, and H across there. Now that's good, except for I would like this to flow along my profile of my ribbon. So let's just delete that out of there for a second. And let's zoom in on this. If we go into node mode and we hover over top of this line segment and we right click, you'll see that we're presented with some options. We actually want to turn this to a Bezier curve. So if I click that, then I'm given some control points that I can actually go ahead and shape this to better fit along the profile of the edge of my ribbon. And I can use the actual edge of my ribbon as a bit of a guide to get that just right. I think I'm pretty happy with that. And then I'll go back to my pick tool, and then I can go Control, Shift, and H. And it's going to flip it across the center point. I select those two things, right click, and join those, moving my endpoints. And now I have a nice vector line that I can use. If I select that, I use my cursor keys on my keyboard, I can nudge that up so it's slightly above where it needs to be, just slightly, so I can make sure that it's okay. That all looks great. Now let's lay out some text to put on that actual curve. So let's just go to your drawing tab and then also choose the create text, and you'll be presented with a dialog where you can start to type in some text. So we're going to type in hole in one. That looks okay. We're going to use bold text. Let's go ahead and reduce the size of this just a little bit to be like 0.35. And we are going to make sure that our text alignment's in the center. That looks great. So let's close that down. Now we need to put that on the line. So to do that, we're going to use the text on a curve tool. So let's click that. And to do that, you'll need to have some text selected and then also a curve selected. And then you'll be presented with some options here. The first one we're going to use is maintain text size, which looks great. Text spacing is fine. It's actually above the line, which is great. Let's give it a bit of an offset distance because it's not quite centered on our ribbon. So let's just go ahead and give it 0.1. And that's a little bit too much. So we'll just give it 0.05. And that looks pretty good right there. I'm happy with that. And if by chance your text happens to be flipped on the bottom side of your line, don't worry. What you can do is you can just click this button here and put your text on the other side, and that should sort that out for you. That all looks great in the middle, and we're going to go ahead and close that down. Now there we have it. Now we're ready to go ahead and create some tooling for this. Now we're going to do that in a separate video, and it'll be linked below in your related videos. So have a look at that if you'd like, and we can get this thing cut. Okay.